Her bloodied hands had dug into the mountain for 7 merciless years, her screams absorbed by stone walls and ignored by the armed guards who treated her as property rather than human. The Apache warrior who discovered her didn't just offer escape. He saw the unbroken queen beneath her scars, bringing her to a people who would crown her spirit with their most sacred honor. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go! The Montana mountains guarded their secrets like ancient sentinels, unmoved by time or human suffering. Veiled in morning mist, the illegal mining camp sprawled like an open wound across the hidden valley, its boundaries marked by rusting barbed wire and the watchful eyes of armed men. The sun hadn't yet crested the eastern ridge, but Maya Chen's aching body had already learned to wake before the guards' whistles pierced the dawn. 7 years of captivity had trained her better than any alarm clock ever could. She rolled from her thin mattress, bare feet meeting the splintered wooden floor. Her small cabin, more a shack than proper shelter, offered little protection from the mountain's bitter cold. 27 now, Maya had arrived here at 19, lured by false promises of well-paid work and a fresh start after leaving college. What she found instead was imprisonment, her passport taken, her communications cut, her very existence erased from the world beyond these mountains. Up! Everyone up! The familiar bark of Randall, the head guard, echoed across the compound. Maya pulled her dark hair into a tight bun, fingers working quickly through the tangles. Time wasted on appearance meant less time for the meager breakfast they were allowed. Her once soft hands were now calloused maps of her suffering, each line and hardened patch marking seasons of digging, hauling and processing the precious minerals that made the camp's invisible owners wealthy. Through the grimy window, she watched the other workers emerge from similar cabins. 12 in total, a mix of immigrants and desperate Americans, all trapped by the same web of deceit. Some had been here longer than Maya, their eyes vacant, their spirits broken beyond repair. Others were newer, still harboring the dangerous flame of hope that Maya had learned to carefully conceal. Hope in this place was dangerous. It made you take risks, made you visible to men who preferred their workers compliant and invisible. Chen, water duty today. Randall's heavy boots crunched on the gravel outside her door. Maya stepped out, head lowered in practiced submission. At 5'4", her slight frame seemed even smaller beside Randall's towering height. The creek's running low. Go further up the mountain if you have to. She nodded without meeting his eyes. Water duty was both blessing and curse. Harder physical labor hauling heavy containers up and down treacherous terrain, but a rare chance to be away from the constant surveillance of the main camp. Take Jackson with you. He's been eyeing the perimeter too much lately. Maya's stomach tightened. Jackson was new, barely 3 months in camp. His eyes still held that dangerous spark, the reckless calculation of escape. They'd pair him with her, hoping her years of compliance would temper his rebellion. It was a common tactic, use the broken to break the unbroken. In the mess hall, a cramped structure that smelled perpetually of mold and burned coffee, Maya forced down a bowl of watery oatmeal. Across the table, Jackson watched her with curiosity. He was young, maybe 22, with a face still untouched by the weathering that marked the rest of them. "Is it true you've been here 7 years?" he whispered when the guard turned away. Maya's spoon paused midway to her mouth. She gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "How do you—" Jackson leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. "Stand it?" She met his eyes briefly, seeing her younger self reflected there. The same desperate need for connection, for hope, for some confirmation that survival was possible. Maya had learned that such conversations were dangerous. Connections meant vulnerability, and vulnerability in this place was a luxury no one could afford. "You don't stand it," she finally whispered back. "You endure it, one day at a time." Before Jackson could respond, a whistle signaled the end of breakfast. The workers rose in unison, bowls clattering as they were stacked by the wash basin. Outside, the sun now illuminated the full expanse of their prison. Beyond the camp's boundaries rose the majestic peaks of the Montana wilderness, beautiful and cruel in their indifference. Somewhere beyond those mountains was the world Maya had once belonged to, a world that had continued without her, that had forgotten she existed. As she collected the water containers and headed toward the mountain path, Maya allowed herself one brief moment to lift her gaze to the vast blue sky above. In 7 years of captivity, she had learned to make herself small, invisible, to disappear even while present. But deep within, in a place the guards couldn't reach, a tiny ember refused to die. Not hope exactly, but something more elemental. A quiet, stubborn insistence that she was still Maya Chen, still human, still alive. And somewhere high above, an eagle circled the mountain peaks, its keen eyes observing the unnatural scars humans had carved into the wilderness below. The mountain path twisted upward like a snake, narrow and treacherous. Maya moved with practiced efficiency, her body remembering every dangerous dip and loose stone. Behind her, Jackson struggled, his breathing heavy as he adjusted to the altitude. The empty water containers clattered against his back with each stumbling step. "How much further?" he gasped, pausing to wipe sweat despite the morning chill. "The usual creek's another half-mile," Maya replied, her voice soft from disuse. "But Randall said it's running low. We might need to go to the upper basin." Jackson cursed under his breath. 2 more miles of this? There has to be a closer source." Maya didn't answer. There was, in fact, a closer spring, one she'd discovered years ago during her 3rd escape attempt. She'd been punished severely after being recaptured, but the knowledge of that hidden water source remained her secret, one of the few things that belonged solely to her. They reached the creek an hour later. As Randall had predicted, it was barely a trickle, the drought affecting even this high elevation. Maya knelt beside the meager flow, running her fingers through the cold water. Her reflection fragmented across the surface. Hollow cheeks, dark eyes, skin weathered beyond her years. "We'll have to go higher," she said, standing. Jackson threw down his containers in frustration. "This is insane. Do they want us to die out here?" He kicked at a rock, sending it skittering down the mountainside. "What even is this place? I signed up to work security for a private mining operation. Nobody mentioned prisoners and slave labor." Maya glanced around nervously. "Keep your voice down." "Why? There's nobody here but us." "The mountains have ears," she whispered, a saying she'd learned from old Lin, another prisoner who disappeared last winter after speaking too freely. They continued upward, the path growing steeper. Maya's muscles burned with familiar pain as she navigated the terrain. She could feel Jackson watching her, studying her movements, her calm efficiency born from years of survival. 7 years, he muttered, shaking his head. "I'd have gone crazy or died trying to escape." "Many have," Maya replied simply. 14 that I've known. The mountains keep their bones." Jackson fell silent, the reality of their situation sinking deeper. After another hour of climbing, they reached the upper basin where a stronger stream flowed between moss-covered rocks. As they filled their containers, Jackson lowered his voice. "I've been mapping the guard rotations. There's a 15-minute window every 3rd night when the southwest corner is unmonitored. The fence there is older, weaker." Maya continued filling her container, face expressionless. She'd heard similar plans before, watched them fail, witnessed the consequences. "I'm leaving in 2 days," Jackson continued. "Come with me. 2 have better odds than 1. She secured the lid on her container, buying time to compose her response. "They have dogs, Jackson, and if the guards don't catch you, the wilderness will. It's 30 miles to the nearest road. I'd rather die out there than live like this." Maya stood, adjusting the heavy container on her back. "If you're determined to try, I won't stop you. But I won't come either." She paused, then added quietly, "And I won't tell them." Jackson seemed about to argue when a sound froze them both, the distant crack of a twig breaking underfoot. They scanned the surrounding forest, hearts pounding. The dense pines and aspens revealed nothing, but Maya felt it, the weight of eyes watching. "Probably a deer," Jackson whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Maya nodded, though she didn't believe it either. Something, or someone, had been moving parallel to their path since they'd left camp. She'd sensed it several times, but dismissed it as paranoia, the constant companion of the captive. They began their descent in tense silence, the water sloshing heavily against their backs. The sensation of being watched never left Maya, raising the fine hairs on her neck. After years of captivity, she'd developed an almost animal instinct for danger. Meanwhile, 2 miles east, Marcus Wolf Blackwater crouched beside a deer trail, studying fresh boot prints that had no business in this remote wilderness. At 42, Wolf moved through these mountains with the quiet confidence of someone returning to their true home. His Apache grandfather had first brought him to these lands as a boy, teaching him to track, to listen, to become part of the forest rather than an intruder upon it. Later, the Army Rangers had honed those skills, turning the mountain boy into a shadow warrior who could track targets through the world's most hostile environments. Now, 3 years after his honorable discharge, Wolf had returned to his ancestral lands, working as a wilderness guide and unofficial guardian of this corner of the Blackfoot Apache Reservation that bordered the national forest. For weeks, he'd been investigating rumors from the tribal elders about strange activities in the mountains, unfamiliar vehicles on remote roads, the distant sound of machinery where no authorized operations existed, wildlife fleeing from areas that had been undisturbed for generations. Wolf's calloused fingers traced the outline of the boot print, his dark eyes narrowing. These weren't the tracks of recreational hikers or Forest Service personnel. The depth and pattern spoke of people carrying heavy loads, following established routes rather than exploring. He stood, securing his pack, decision made. He would follow these tracks to their source. Something unnatural was happening in these mountains, something that disturbed the delicate balance his people had worked for generations to protect. As he moved through the forest with silent efficiency, Wolf had no way of knowing that his path would soon intersect with a woman who had been invisible to the world for 7 long years. A woman whose freedom would soon rest in his hands. The metal pick struck stone with a dull clang that reverberated through Maya's arms. In the dim light of the mine shaft, sweat glistened on her brow, despite the underground chill. After returning from water duty, she'd been reassigned to extraction. Punishment, perhaps, for taking too long on the mountain, or simply Randall's capricious cruelty. "Deeper," barked the shaft supervisor, a wiry man called Porter, whose missing front teeth gave his speech a whistling quality. "This section needs to be cleared by nightfall." Maya adjusted her grip on the pick, ignoring the fresh blisters forming beneath old calluses. Beside her, Elena, a 40-something woman from Guatemala who had been at the camp even longer than Maya, worked methodically. Her face an expressionless mask beneath her dust-covered headlamp. "They're pushing harder than usual," Elena whispered in Spanish when Porter moved further down the tunnel. 3 new guards arrived yesterday. Something's happening." Maya nodded almost imperceptibly. She'd noticed the increased activity too. More supply trucks, hushed conversations among the guards, longer work shifts. The camp operated on a knife's edge of tension. "Jackson's planning to run," Maya murmured back, her pick striking rhythmically. "Tomorrow night." Elena's movements faltered for just a moment before resuming. "Fool boy," she breathed. "They always run in summer. Summer makes them think the mountains are kind." Maya had observed the same pattern. The warmer months created an illusion of safety that lured the desperate into attempts that usually ended in tragedy. She'd made her own last attempt during her second year, a carefully planned escape through the northern boundary during a thunderstorm that masked her movements. She'd made it 18 miles before the dogs found her, the scars on her back from the aftermath still burned in cold weather. "Have you told him about the new motion sensors?" Elena asked. "No," Maya admitted. "He wouldn't believe me anyway. New ones never do." They fell silent as Porter returned, his flashlight beam sweeping over their progress. Maya kept her head down, focused on the task. Being noticed was never good in this place. As darkness fell across the mountain, the workers were herded back to their cabins after a dinner of watery stew and stale bread. Maya's body ached from 12 hours underground, her lungs burning from stone dust. She sat on her bunk, using precious drinking water to clean the worst of the grime from her face and hands. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jackson in the adjacent cabin, his voice a low murmur as he spoke to someone, probably Miguel, the college student from Texas who'd arrived a month ago. Maya closed her eyes, imagining the familiar script, the whispered plans, the conviction that they had discovered some overlooked weakness in security, the belief that freedom waited just beyond the fence. She didn't blame them. In their position, with spirits not yet crushed by years of captivity, she might have joined them. But experience had taught her the brutal mathematics of escape. The camp sat in a natural bowl surrounded by mountainous terrain. The nearest town was 3 days' hard travel through wilderness, and the camp's owners had resources that made successful escape nearly impossible. Maya lay back on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. 7 years of her life had disappeared into this mountain. She'd arrived a 19-year-old college sophomore, bright-eyed and eager for the summer job that promised good money for ecological research. The online posting had seemed legitimate. The Brighter Horizons Mining Corporation needed assistance to help assess environmental impact. Her parents had worried, their only daughter traveling alone to Montana, but Maya had been determined to prove her independence. "It's only for 3 months," she'd promised. "I'll call every week." The memory of her mother's face at the airport, worried but proud, twisted like a knife in Maya's chest. Did they still look for her? Or had they accepted the email sent from her account announcing she'd decided to find herself traveling abroad? Did they believe she'd abandoned them? Or did they know in their hearts she would never leave without saying goodbye? A sudden commotion outside pulled Maya from her thoughts. Boots on gravel, voices raised in anger. She moved to the window, peering cautiously through the grime-streaked glass. In the central yard, Jackson knelt on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. Randall stood over him, radio in hand, face contorted with fury. 3 guards formed a semicircle around them, rifles ready. "Thought you could steal from us?" Randall was saying, his voice carrying in the night air. "We found the radio parts in your bunk. Who were you planning to contact?" Jackson said something Maya couldn't hear, which earned him a vicious kick to the ribs. She winced, turning away from the window. There would be no escape attempt tomorrow. Jackson had played his hand too early, taken too great a risk. Now he would face the consequences, the isolation shed, reduced rations, perhaps worse. Maya sat on the edge of her bunk, hands clasped tightly to stop their trembling. The camp had a rhythm to its punishment, a calculated cruelty designed to break not just the offender, but anyone who witnessed it. Tomorrow, they would all be gathered to watch whatever lesson Randall deemed appropriate for Jackson's transgression. Miles away, Wolf Blackwater made camp beneath an overhanging rock that sheltered him from the light rainfall that had begun at sunset. He'd followed the mysterious tracks to a service road that shouldn't exist according to any official map, a crude cut through the forest that showed signs of regular use by heavy vehicles. As he heated a small can of beans over a nearly smokeless fire, Wolf reviewed his mental map of the territory. This section of mountains had always been lightly traveled, too remote for casual hikers, too rugged for easy resource exploitation. Yet someone was investing considerable effort to maintain access and secrecy. His satellite phone buzzed, a text from David Runninghorse, his contact at the Tribal Council. County records show land leased to Brighter Horizons Mining Corp 5 years ago. Environmental survey only, no extraction permits issued. Wolf frowned, putting down his dinner. No extraction permits, yet clear signs of heavy equipment and ongoing activity. Either the most extensive environmental survey in history or something illegal was happening right on the border of tribal lands. He texted back, "Continuing reconnaissance. Will report findings tomorrow." Setting his phone aside, Wolf extinguished his small fire and settled against his pack, rifle within easy reach. His instincts, honed by both his grandfather's teachings and military training, told him he was approaching something dangerous. Tomorrow, he would find answers, one way or another. As sleep claimed him, Wolf had no way of knowing that less than 3 miles away, a woman who had almost forgotten what freedom felt like stared at the same stars through a dirty window, wondering if death might be the only escape from these mountains that had become her prison. Morning came with the shriek of the camp whistle, pulling Maya from a fitful sleep. Outside, guards moved with unusual urgency, shouting orders that carried an edge of tension. She dressed quickly, steeling herself for what was to come. The camp had rules for dealing with attempted escape, and all would be forced to witness the consequences. In the yard, workers gathered in a silent semicircle. Jackson had been tied to a post, erected specifically for such punishments, his shirt torn away to expose his back. His face was barely recognizable beneath the bruising, one eye swollen shut entirely. Beside him stood Randall, a leather strap dangling from his hand. Maya kept her face carefully blank, though her stomach churned. She'd stood here before, sometimes as witness, once as victim. Each time, something inside her withered further. "Let this be a reminder," Randall announced, pacing before the assembled workers. "You are here because you're useful. The moment you become a problem," he gestured toward Jackson, "your usefulness is reconsidered." The first crack of the strap against Jackson's back echoed across the yard. Maya flinched internally, but maintained her outward stillness. Beside her, Elena murmured a prayer in Spanish, her lips barely moving. After the 10th strike, Jackson's screams faded to whimpers. By the 15th, he hung limp against his restraints. Consciousness mercifully fled. Randall finally stepped back, breathing heavily. "Get back to work," he ordered, tossing the bloodied strap to a junior guard. "Production targets are doubled today. Anyone failing to meet quota gets reduced rations." As the workers dispersed, Maya risked a glance toward Miguel, whose face had gone ashen. The young man had been Jackson's friend, possibly his co-conspirator. His eyes met Maya's briefly, filled with naked horror and a dawning understanding of their reality. "Don't," she mouthed silently, recognizing the look of someone whose desperation might override caution. He looked away quickly, shoulders hunched as he hurried toward the processing shed. At midday, Maya was assigned to the sorting facility, separating minerals under the watchful eye of Porter. The work was less physically demanding than the mine, but required constant concentration. Her fingers moved methodically through the rocky debris, identifying the telltale gleam of rare earth elements essential for electronics manufacturing. Now she understood why this illegal operation existed. These minerals were worth fortunes on the international market, especially when extracted without environmental oversight or labor costs. "Chen," Porter's voice snapped her from her thoughts. "You're requested at the main office, now!" Maya's heart stuttered. Being called to the main office never happened, and certainly never meant anything good. She set down her sorting tray with trembling hands, ignoring the questioning looks from other workers. Outside, the afternoon sun momentarily blinded her after hours in the dim sorting room. A guard she didn't recognize escorted her toward the camp's only permanent structure, a two-story building where the operations managers worked. In 7 years, Maya had never been inside. "Wait here," the guard instructed, leaving her in a sparsely furnished anteroom while he knocked on an inner door. Through the thin walls, Maya heard fragments of an urgent conversation. "Perimeter breach on the North Ridge. Someone watching the operation. Could be Federal." The door opened abruptly, and Randall emerged, his face tight with anger. He studied Maya with narrowed eyes. "You and Elena are the only ones who know the high mountain paths," he said without preamble. "We need someone to check the North Ridge camera stations. They've gone offline." Maya blinked in surprise. "You want me to go alone?" "With Curtis?" Randall nodded toward a guard Maya recognized as one of the more reasonable ones. "The regular maintenance crew can't get here until tomorrow. We need those cameras operational now." Maya understood the subtext immediately. Something had spooked them badly enough to send a prisoner on a task that would normally never be entrusted to the captives. The guard's presence would ensure she didn't run, though where she would run to in the high mountains she couldn't imagine. "Get moving," Randall ordered. "And Chen, don't get any ideas. Jackson's still breathing. But that can change." 30 minutes later, Maya found herself climbing a narrow trail toward the northern ridge, a backpack of camera equipment weighing her down. Curtis followed a few paces behind, rifle slung casually but accessibly over his shoulder. The forest closed around them, dappled sunlight filtering through the pine canopy. For the first time in months, Maya breathed air that didn't taste of rock dust and despair. "How much farther?" Curtis called, already winded from the altitude. "Another mile," Maya responded, consulting the crude map Randall had provided. "The first camera station is near the lightning-struck pine at the ridge overlook." Meanwhile, Wolf Blackwater crouched in the dense undergrowth of that very ridge, examining the small camera he'd discovered mounted to a weathered pine. He'd found 3 similar devices during his reconnaissance, all positioned to monitor approaches to what he now knew was an illegal mining operation. After disabling each camera carefully, Wolf had continued his surveillance, mapping guard positions and studying the camp's layout through high-powered binoculars. What he'd discovered sickened him. Not just environmental destruction, but human beings kept in conditions reminiscent of concentration camps. Wolf checked his satellite phone. No signal. He would need to reach higher ground to contact the authorities. But first, he needed more evidence of what was happening in that hidden valley. He froze suddenly, hearing voices approaching along the trail below. Melting deeper into the shadows, Wolf watched as 2 figures appeared around the bend, a small Asian woman carrying equipment, followed by an armed man in a uniform he now recognized from the camp. Wolf's hand moved silently to his knife. Whatever happened next would change everything. Maya knelt beside the disabled camera, fingers working methodically to replace what she assumed was a weather-damaged component. Curtis stood several yards away, scanning the ridge with bored indifference, rifle now held loosely at his side. The afternoon sun filtered through the pines, casting long shadows across the rocky ground. "How much longer?" Curtis called, checking his watch impatiently. "We need to hit 2 more stations before dark." 5 minutes, Maya replied, focusing on reconnecting wires that appeared to have been deliberately cut. Her brow furrowed. This wasn't weather damage or equipment failure. Someone had been here. The realization sent ice through her veins. She glanced up at Curtis, wondering if he understood the implications. If someone was targeting the security system, it meant the camp's isolation, its primary defense, had been compromised. A slight movement in the trees beyond Curtis caught Maya's eye. A shadow shifting against shadow, too deliberate to be wind. Her hands froze on the camera. Years of captivity had taught her to observe without revealing her awareness, to process danger without betraying fear. Curtis turned, sensing her sudden stillness. "What is it?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just trying to figure out the wiring. It's more complicated than..." The shadow moved again, this time resolving into the outline of a man. Maya's breath caught in her throat as a tall figure stepped silently from the forest behind Curtis. The guard never saw it coming. A hand clamped over his mouth, an arm locked around his neck in a practiced hold. Curtis struggled briefly before going limp, unconscious, but not dead. The stranger eased Curtis to the ground, securing the guard's hands with his own zip ties. Only then did he turn to face Maya. She scrambled backward, reaching for the only weapon available, a screwdriver from the toolkit. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she held it before her, knowing how pitiful her defense must appear. "Stay back," she warned, voice steadier than she felt. The man remained motionless, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, powerful build of someone whose strength came from survival rather than vanity. His copper skin and sharp cheekbones spoke of Native American heritage, while the watchful calculation in his dark eyes suggested military training. He wore forest camouflage clothing that blended seamlessly with the wilderness around them. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice a deep rumble that somehow carried both authority and gentleness. "My name is Marcus Blackwater. Most people call me Wolf." Maya didn't lower the screwdriver. "You disabled the cameras." A slight nod. "I've been tracking unusual activity in these mountains for weeks. Found your camp yesterday." His eyes studied her, taking in the faded clothes that hung from her too thin frame, the wary posture, the mix of fear and defiance in her stance. "You're not there willingly." It wasn't a question, but Maya answered anyway. "None of us are." "How many?" 12 prisoners, 15 guards, 2 managers. The information spilled from her lips automatically, survival instinct calculating that cooperation might keep her alive. Wolf glanced at the unconscious guard, then back at Maya. "What's your name?" Maya Chen." Something flickered across Wolf's face. Recognition. "From Seattle. Disappeared 7 years ago while on a research trip." The screwdriver wavered in her grip. "You know who I am?" "Your case was featured in a training program on missing persons in wilderness areas. They suspected you'd been caught in a landslide or animal attack." Wolf took a careful step forward. "Your parents never stopped looking." The mention of her parents nearly broke her. Maya's vision blurred with tears. She refused to let fall, years of forced composure the only thing keeping her upright. "There's no time for this," she said, blinking rapidly. "When Curtis doesn't report back, they'll send more guards." Wolf nodded. Decision made. "I have a satellite phone on the higher ridge. We can call for help." "No!" Maya's response was immediate, emphatic. "They'll kill the others if they think there's a raid coming. Jackson, Elena, Miguel, they'll be executed and the evidence destroyed before help arrives." Wolf studied her, respect dawning in his eyes at her concern for others, despite her own desperate situation. "Then we need a different approach," he said. "My tribe's settlement is 3 days' journey from here. We can reach them, contact the FBI through secure channels, and return with enough evidence to shut this operation down for good." Maya glanced at Curtis, who was beginning to stir. "And him? He'll have a headache, but he'll live." Wolf extended his hand toward her, palm up, not grabbing, not forcing, simply offering. "Maya Chen, I can help you save everyone in that camp, but we need to move now. Will you trust me?" She stared at his outstretched hand. 7 years of captivity had taught her that trust was weakness, that hope led to devastation. Yet something in this stranger's steady gaze made her want to believe that freedom might be more than a fading dream. Maya placed the screwdriver in his palm instead of taking his hand, a gesture that said she would follow but wasn't ready for contact. Wolf seemed to understand, pocketing the tool with a respectful nod. "This way," he said, turning toward a nearly invisible trail that led deeper into the wilderness. "Stay close." As Maya followed him into the forest, she cast one final glance at the valley that had been her prison for 7 long years. Whether she was walking towards salvation or another form of danger remained to be seen, but for the first time since her capture, she was moving of her own free will, and that alone felt like breathing after a lifetime underwater. They moved through the forest like shadows, Wolf setting a pace that pushed Maya to her limits. Despite years of hard labor, the rigors of wilderness travel quickly revealed the toll captivity had taken on her body. Each breath burned in her lungs as they climbed higher into the mountains, following game trails invisible to untrained eyes. By sunset, Maya's legs trembled with exhaustion, but she refused to ask for rest. Freedom propelled her forward, even as her muscles screamed in protest. Only when the light became too dim to safely navigate the treacherous terrain did Wolf finally signal a halt. "We'll stop here for the night," he said, gesturing to a small clearing sheltered by a rocky overhang. "It's defensible and hidden from aerial view." Maya sank to the ground, her back against stone, unable to disguise her relief. Wolf noticed but said nothing, respecting her pride. He moved with practiced efficiency, gathering materials for a small, nearly smokeless fire. "We can't risk a full campfire," he explained, arranging twigs in a careful pattern, "but we need warmth. The mountains get dangerous at night, even in summer." Maya watched his methodical movements, trying to assess this man who had suddenly become her lifeline. His hands were calloused but gentle with the kindling, his movements economical and precise. Nothing wasted, nothing for show, the opposite of the theatrical cruelty she'd witnessed from the camp guards for years. "You said you're from a tribe," she finally ventured, her voice rough from disuse. "Which one?" Wolf glanced up from his work. "Blackfoot Apache. My grandfather was a tribal elder. My mother left the reservation when she married my father, but brought me back every summer." The fire caught, casting flickering light across his weathered features. "After 3 tours with the rangers, I came back to stay." He reached into his pack, pulling out a flat package wrapped in foil and a canteen. He handed both to Maya, who accepted them with uncertain hands. "Eat slowly," he advised. "Your stomach needs to readjust to proper food." The jerky was tough but flavorful, spiced with unfamiliar herbs. Maya forced herself to take small bites, though her body screamed for her to devour it. The water tasted impossibly sweet after years of metallic-tinged camp rations. "Thank you," she said after finishing half the portion, carefully wrapping the remainder for later. Conservation was a habit 7 years of near starvation had burned into her soul. Wolf nodded, studying the darkening forest around them. "We need to discuss what happens at first light. They'll be looking for you by now." "And Curtis," Maya added. "Will he be able to follow us?" "Not directly. I took him off the trail before he regained consciousness, left him with enough water to make it back to your camp." Wolf's expression hardened. "But they'll organize search parties. Dogs, possibly helicopters if they have access." Maya drew her knees to her chest, suddenly aware of how vulnerable they were. "I should have disabled the radio in his pack. He'll report everything." "You made the choice to warn the others in the camp instead of just saving yourself," Wolf said. "That tells me a lot about who you are, Maya Chen." The sound of her full name, spoken with respect rather than as a command, brought a lump to her throat. In the camp, she had been Chen for so long that her given name had started to feel like it belonged to someone else, someone who had died years ago. "I need to know what we're walking into," Wolf continued. "Tell me about the operation, how it works, who runs it." Maya stared into the tiny flames, organizing her thoughts. It's run by Brighter Horizons Mining Corporation, but that's just a shell. The real owners are never mentioned by name, but Randall sometimes receives calls from someone he calls the director. She paused, memories surfacing. They recruit workers under false pretenses. Research assistants, security personnel, environmental specialists. Once you arrive, they take your identification, cut off communication, and make it clear that resistance means death. How do they move the minerals out? Monthly transport trucks. They process the raw materials on site, then ship them out labeled as geological samples. Maya rubbed her arms, feeling the evening chill despite the fire's warmth. The operation has grown over the years. When I arrived, there were only 6 prisoners. Now there are 12, with new facilities being built. Wolf nodded grimly. Rare earth minerals, worth billions on the international market, especially if extracted outside regulatory oversight. What will happen to the others? Maya asked, the question that had been weighing on her since they fled. Elena has been there longer than me. Miguel is just a college student. And Jackson. Her voice caught, remembering his beaten body tied to the post. Once we reach my people's settlement, we'll contact federal authorities through channels I trust. With your testimony and my evidence, they'll have what they need for a proper raid. Wolf's voice carried a certainty that Maya wanted desperately to believe. But it will take time. 3 days to reach the settlement, maybe another 2 for the authorities to mobilize. They might not have that long, Maya whispered. Wolf studied her across the small fire, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. There's something you're not telling me. Maya hesitated, then nodded. Before I left, I overheard the managers talking about accelerated extraction and site closure. I think they're planning to abandon the operation soon, which means they'll eliminate witnesses, Wolf finished grimly. Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. Maya felt the weight of 12 lives pressing on her shoulders. Had her escape already signed their death warrants? We'll move at first light, Wolf finally said. There's a faster route than the one I planned, more dangerous, but it could save us a day. Maya nodded, then surprised herself by asking, why are you helping me? Why risk your life for strangers? Wolf stared into the darkness beyond their small circle of light. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of generations. My grandfather taught me that all things are connected. The destruction of the earth, the exploitation of people, they come from the same sickness of spirit. His eyes returned to her, intense and unwavering. 7 years ago, you disappeared while trying to protect the land. Now the land offers you a path home. That is not coincidence. Maya had no response to that. After years in a place where human life held no value beyond utility, Wolf's worldview seemed as alien as it was beautiful. As the fire burned down to embers, Wolf removed his jacket and offered it to her. Sleep. I'll keep watch. Maya accepted the jacket, wrapping it around her shoulders. It smelled of pine and wood smoke, sense of freedom rather than the stale sweat and fear that permeated the camp. She settled against the rock wall, wondering if sleep would come amid the storm of emotions churning within her. Wolf? She said softly, using his name for the first time. What if they come for us in the night? He checked his rifle before answering, his movements deliberate and confident. Then they will learn why my grandfather named me after the shadow hunter. He glanced at her, a hint of gentleness breaking through his warrior's demeanor. Rest, Maya. Tomorrow will test us both. As Maya closed her eyes, the vastness of the wilderness around them felt both terrifying and exhilarating. After years confined by fences and armed guards, the boundless forest represented a freedom so overwhelming it was almost painful. And somewhere in that darkness she knew, Men who had stolen 7 years of her life were preparing to hunt her down. Dawn broke in a wash of pale gold across the eastern ridge. Maya woke instantly, the habit of 7 years snapping her from sleep to alertness in a heartbeat. For a disorienting moment, she expected the familiar whistle, the shouted orders, the dread of another day in captivity. Instead, she found herself beneath an open sky, Wolf's jacket still wrapped around her shoulders. Wolf himself crouched at the edge of their small camp, motionless as the stones around him, watching the valley below. He turned as she sat up, acknowledging her with a silent nod. "They're coming," he said simply, handing her his binoculars. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she focused on the distant figures moving through the forest below. 3 men with rifles, accompanied by 2 dogs straining at their leashes. She recognized Randall's distinctive gait leading the group. "They found Curtis faster than I expected," Wolf continued, packing their minimal campsite with swift efficiency. "The dogs will follow our scent unless we do something about it." "What can we do?" Maya asked, returning the binoculars. The sight of her captors so close sent fear coursing through her veins, threatening to paralyze her. "We changed the rules of the hunt." Wolf shouldered his pack and handed her a smaller one he'd apparently prepared while she slept. "My grandfather taught me that when pursued by those stronger than you must become part of the land itself." They set off at a grueling pace, heading not away from their pursuers, but at an oblique angle, climbing toward a rocky ridgeline where the morning sun struck in blinding intensity. Maya followed Wolf's instructions precisely. Step only on stone where possible, wade through every stream they crossed, use branches to brush away tracks where the ground was soft. By mid-morning, they had reached a swift-flowing river that cut through the mountain like a liquid knife. The water churned and foamed over jagged rocks, its roar drowning all other sounds. "We cross here," Wolf said, surveying the treacherous current. Maya stared at the rushing water in disbelief. "That's at least 50 feet across. The current would sweep us away." Wolf pointed upstream to where a massive fallen pine created a precarious bridge across the chasm, its trunk suspended 15 feet above the raging water. "The dogs will lose our scent at the water," he explained, "and our pursuers will expect us to cross downstream where it's wider and slower. This gives us advantage." Maya looked at the log, then back at Wolf, swallowing hard. Heights had terrified her since childhood. The thought of crossing that narrow, slick trunk above churning waters nearly stopped her heart. "I can't," she whispered, hating the weakness in her voice. "I'm afraid of heights. Always have been." Wolf studied her, not with judgment, but with consideration. "Fear is wisdom when there is real danger, but sometimes we must move through fear to find safety." He held her gaze steadily. "I will go first and secure a line, then you will follow, connected to me." Before she could protest, Wolf was moving, testing the trunk's stability before stepping out onto it. He crossed with the natural balance of someone raised in the mountains, each foot finding secure purchase despite the rough bark and occasional sway of the massive log. From the middle, he secured a thin cord to the trunk, then tossed the remainder to Maya. "Tie this around your waist," he called over the river's roar. "If you slip, I will hold you." Maya's fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar knots, her breath coming in short gasps. Behind them, the distant baying of dogs carried on the wind. Closer now, there was no time for hesitation. With the cord secured around her waist, Maya stepped onto the log. The first few feet were manageable, her eyes fixed on the rough bark beneath her feet. But as she reached the midpoint, where the drop to the water seemed endless, vertigo struck with crippling force. She froze, legs suddenly leaden, vision tunneling. "I can't move," she called, voice tight with panic. "I can't. Maya!" Wolf's voice cut through her fear, calm and steady. "Look at me. Not down, not behind, just at me." She raised her eyes to find him watching her, his presence somehow more solid than the mountain itself. "You survived 7 years in that camp," he said, each word deliberate and clear despite the river's noise. "This log is nothing compared to what you've already overcome." Something in his words reached beyond her terror. Maya took a deep breath, then another. Her foot moved forward, then the next. Each step was a battle against instinct, but Wolf's unwavering gaze gave her a focus point, an anchor in the dizzying expanse. When she finally reached the other side, legs trembling with exertion and lingering fear, Wolf helped her onto solid ground. For a brief moment, his hands steadied her shoulders, the first human touch she'd experienced in years that wasn't meant to harm or control. "Thank you," she managed, the words inadequate for what had just transpired between them. Wolf nodded, already scanning the terrain ahead. "We've bought some time, but they'll find a crossing eventually." They continued east, climbing steadily through increasingly rugged country. Wolf set a challenging pace, but now he watched Maya more carefully, noting her limits without comment. When her breath became too labored or her steps faltered, he would pause briefly, ostensibly to check their surroundings or consult his mental map. By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered over the peaks. The temperature dropped sharply as thunder rumbled in the distance. Wolf led them to a cave set deep in a cliff face, invisible until they were nearly upon it. "We'll shelter here," he said, as fat raindrops began to fall. "The storm will help cover our trail, but we can't risk continuing in lightning." Inside, the cave extended deeper than it first appeared, opening into a small chamber. Wolf inspected it carefully before allowing Maya to enter fully. "Your people used this place," she observed, noticing the ancient smoke stains on the ceiling, the faint remnants of handprints pressed into the clay walls generations ago. Wolf nodded, arranging stones for another small fire. "This was a sacred place for vision quests. Young men and women would come here to seek guidance from the spirits." As rain lashed the mountainside outside, Wolf shared his remaining provisions, dried berries, more jerky, a small cake of something sweet and nutty. They ate in companionable silence, the day's journey having forged a wordless understanding between them. "Wolf," Maya finally said, watching him check his rifle, "if they catch us, promise me something." He looked up, waiting. "Don't let them take me back alive." Wolf's expression remained impassive as he absorbed Maya's desperate request, but something flickered in his eyes. Not judgment, but a deep understanding of what captivity truly meant. "I promise you won't go back," he finally said, his voice low against the storm's fury outside, "but not in the way you're asking." He set his rifle aside and met her gaze directly. "We're going to make it, Maya. Both of us. And those responsible will face justice." Maya looked away, embarrassed by her moment of weakness, yet unable to abandon the fear that had become her constant companion for 7 years. "You don't understand what they're capable of. I understand more than you know." Wolf's voice held an edge she hadn't heard before. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a puckered scar that ran from wrist to elbow. "Afghanistan. I was captured for 17 days. I know what happens in places where human life holds no value." Maya stared at the scar, then at Wolf's face, seeing him differently, not just as a rescuer or guide, but as someone who had walked through his own darkness and emerged intact. The revelation created a bridge between them that mere words could not have built. "How did you survive?" she asked softly. "One breath at a time, and by remembering who I was before captivity." Wolf added another small branch to their fire. "My grandfather taught me that our spirit cannot be imprisoned unless we surrender it willingly." Maya contemplated this as the storm raged outside, wind howling through the mountain passes like restless ghosts. Had she surrendered her spirit during those 7 years? She had survived, yes. But at what cost? The woman who had disappeared on that summer day, bright, hopeful, unafraid, seemed like a stranger now. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted, the words painful to speak aloud. Maya Chen disappeared a long time ago. Wolf was quiet for a moment. "When I returned from war, I felt the same. My grandfather took me to the mountains for a ceremony called calling back the spirit. He said that trauma scatters parts of ourselves like wind scatters seeds." Wolf's voice softened. "But those parts aren't lost, just waiting to be gathered again." The simplicity and wisdom of this perspective brought unexpected tears to Maya's eyes. She wiped them away quickly, uncomfortable with this vulnerability. Wolf pretended not to notice, giving her privacy in the small space. Instead, he removed a small leather pouch from around his neck and carefully unwrapped it, revealing a mixture of dried herbs and tobacco. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the fire. Maya nodded, watching as he sprinkled a small amount of the mixture onto the flames. A sweet, earthy scent filled the cave as the herbs smoldered. "A prayer for protection," Wolf explained, "and for clarity." Maya breathed in the aromatic smoke, letting it fill her lungs. Whether from exhaustion, the herbs, or simply the first real moment of safety in years, she felt some of her constant tension begin to uncoil. "Rest," Wolf said. "I'll take first watch." This time, sleep came more easily, dreamless and deep. She woke to Wolf's hand on her shoulder, gentle but urgent. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a crystalline dawn breaking over the mountains. But Wolf's expression was grim. "They crossed the river downstream," he said, "and they've brought reinforcements." Maya was on her feet instantly, adrenaline flooding her system. "How many?" "At least 6 men, still with dogs. They're moving fast." Wolf handed her a piece of jerky and his canteen. "Eat quickly, we need to move." As they prepared to leave their shelter, Wolf paused, studying the eastern sky. "There's another storm building behind these mountains, a big one." Maya followed his gaze to where dark clouds massed on the horizon. "Is that good or bad for us?" "Both. Or it will cover our tracks, but if it catches us in the high country..." He didn't need to finish. Mountain storms could kill even experienced wilderness travelers. They set out at a grueling pace, Wolf leading them higher into terrain so rugged that Maya had to use her hands as much as her feet, scrambling over boulders and along narrow ledges. Every muscle screamed in protest, but the knowledge of armed men behind them pushed her beyond perceived limits. By midday, they had reached a high plateau overlooking a dizzying drop. The valley stretched below them, a patchwork of forests and meadows. In the far distance, Maya could just make out a thin column of smoke rising from what appeared to be a settlement. "Your people?" she asked, hope rising for the first time. Wolf nodded. "The western edge of the reservation. A day's journey still, but we're making good time." A day. Just one more day to freedom, to justice, to reclaiming her life. The thought was almost too enormous to comprehend after years of forced resignation. The moment of hope shattered as a rifle shot cracked through the air, sending stone chips flying from the rock face near Maya's head. She dropped instinctively as Wolf pulled her behind a boulder, his body shielding hers. "They've spotted us," he said, voice calm despite the danger, already scanning their surroundings for options. "The shot came from the ridge south of here. They're trying to cut us off from the reservation." Maya's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. "What do we do?" Wolf pointed to a narrow ravine to their east. "We need to make it to that passage. Once through, the terrain will give us more cover." He checked his rifle. "I'll provide distraction. When I start shooting, you run for the ravine entrance. Don't stop, no matter what you hear." "No," Maya said firmly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "We stay together." "Udu." Wolf studied her for a moment, something like respect kindling in his eyes. "Then we move together, but quickly. Stay low. Use the rocks for cover." They abandoned their packs, taking only water and Wolf's rifle. Moving in a crouched run, they darted from boulder to boulder as more shots rang out behind them. Maya's world narrowed to the ground before her, each step, each breath, measured and deliberate. They were 20 yards from the ravine when disaster struck. As Maya leapt across a gap between boulders, her foot slipped on loose shale. She crashed down hard, pain lancing through her ankle as rocks clattered away from her fall, giving away their position. Wolf was beside her instantly, helping her up as gunfire intensified around them. Maya tried to put weight on her ankle and nearly collapsed again. "It's sprained, maybe broken," she gasped through gritted teeth. Wolf made a split-second assessment, then did something that shocked her. He handed her his rifle. "Cover us," he instructed, then lifted her in a smooth motion, carrying her toward the ravine. Maya had never fired a gun before, but instinct took over. She balanced the rifle awkwardly against Wolf's shoulder, aimed in the general direction of their pursuers, and pulled the trigger. The recoil was stronger than expected, jolting through her inexperienced hands. But the shots forced their attackers to take cover, buying precious seconds. Wolf ducked into the ravine, still carrying Maya, and set her down behind a fallen tree. He took back the rifle, checked her ankle with gentle efficiency, then tore strips from his shirt to bind it tightly. "Can you move with support?" he asked, already fashioning a crude walking stick from a branch. Maya nodded, determined not to become a burden. As Wolf helped her stand, leaning heavily on both him and the makeshift staff, a new sound reached them, the low rumble of approaching thunder. "The storm's coming faster than I expected," Wolf said, looking at the darkening sky. "We need to find better shelter before it hits." With Maya hobbling beside him, they moved deeper into the ravine as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Behind them, the shouts of their pursuers grew fainter, then stopped altogether as the storm's advance forced even the determined hunters to seek cover. The world dissolved into sheets of rain and deafening thunder, the ravine quickly becoming a churning stream that threatened to sweep them away. Wolf spotted a hollow beneath a rocky outcropping and guided Maya toward it, both of them soaked to the skin and chilled to the bone by the time they reached its meager shelter. As lightning split the sky, illuminating Wolf's face in stark relief, Maya realized something that should have terrified her, but instead filled her with a strange calm. She trusted this man completely, a trust she had not given to anyone since before her captivity. "Why are you risking so much for me?" she asked, voice nearly lost in the storm's fury. Wolf looked at her, rainwater streaming down his face like tears. "Because 7 years ago, the world lost something precious when they took you. And because no one deserves to be forgotten." In that moment, as thunder shook the mountains around them and pain throbbed in her injured ankle, Maya felt something long dormant stir within her chest. A fierce will to live, not just survive, to reclaim not just her freedom, but her very self. The storm raged through the night, transforming the mountain into a roaring, living entity that seemed determined to scour away all human presence. Huddled in their small shelter, Maya and Wolf took turns keeping watch, though the ferocity of the tempest made pursuit impossible. By dawn, the downpour had subsided to a gentle mist that clung to the pines and softened the harsh lines of the rocky landscape. Maya's ankle had swollen considerably, the skin mottled with purple bruising. Wolf examined it with a frown, his fingers probing gently. "Not broken, I think, but a bad sprain. You shouldn't walk on it." He sat back on his heels, calculating. "We're still at least 15 miles from the reservation boundary." "I can walk," Maya insisted, already attempting to stand. Pain shot through her leg, but she gritted her teeth against it. "We've come too far to stop now." Wolf watched her struggle, respect evident in his expression. "Your spirit is strong, but the body has limits. We need to be smart." He scanned their surroundings, then nodded toward the ravine bottom. The storm will have cleared out our pursuers for now, but it's also created a new path for us. Maya followed his gaze. The previously dry ravine was now a rushing stream, its waters brown with sediment, but flowing steadily eastward toward the reservation. "We build a raft," Wolf explained, already moving to gather fallen branches. "The current will carry us faster than we could travel on foot, especially with your injury." For the next hour, they worked together to construct a crude raft from pine logs lashed together with strips of Wolf's torn shirt and vines he harvested from the ravine walls. The finished craft was simple, but seemed sturdy enough to support their weight. "It won't win any beauty contests," Wolf said with the hint of a smile, "but it should get us down the mountain." He helped Maya onto the center of the raft, positioning her so her injured ankle could rest elevated on their remaining pack. Then, using a long branch as a pole, he pushed them into the current. The raft rocked precariously as the stream claimed them, water splashing over the rough logs. Maya gripped the makeshift craft tightly, fighting vertigo as they began to pick up speed. Wolf stood balanced at the rear, using his pole to steer them away from rocks and fallen trees. "My grandfather would say we've become like water," Wolf called over the rush of the stream. "Finding the path of least resistance, yet powerful enough to carve through mountains, given time." Maya watched the ravine walls slide past, the mountain yielding to their passage in a way it never had to her attempts to escape on foot. There was wisdom in Wolf's words, a perspective so different from the brute force and domination that had defined her captivity. The morning passed in a blur of motion and spray, the ravine gradually widening as they descended. Maya's clothes dried in the strengthening sun, the warmth seeping into her bones after the long, cold night. Despite the pain in her ankle and the ever-present danger, she found herself experiencing moments of something approaching peace. Around midday, the stream joined a larger river, their small raft now dwarfed by the broader expanse of water. Wolf guided them to a sheltered eddy, bringing the craft to rest against a sandy bank. "We need to leave the water here," he explained, scanning the horizon. "The river turns north ahead, away from the reservation. We'll have to continue on foot." Maya's heart sank at the prospect of walking on her injured ankle, but she nodded resolutely. Wolf helped her from the raft, supporting her weight as she tested her ability to bear weight. The pain was intense, but manageable if she leaned heavily on her makeshift staff. They ate the last of their provisions beside the river, a few strips of jerky and handfuls of wild berries Wolf gathered from nearby bushes. The physical toll of their journey showed on both their faces, exhaustion etched in the lines around their eyes, skin wind-burned and scratched from the rugged terrain. "How much farther?" Maya asked, dreading the answer. "About 10 miles, mostly downhill." Wolf studied her face, concern evident in his expression. "At our current pace, we should reach the reservation by nightfall." Maya absorbed this, trying to imagine freedom after so long. It seemed an abstract concept, almost frightening in its enormity. "And then what happens?" she asked quietly. Wolf understood the deeper question she was asking. "Then you begin the hardest journey, the one back to yourself." They set out again, Wolf walking beside Maya, occasionally offering his arm when the terrain grew too difficult for her to navigate with just her staff. The forest around them gradually changed character, the high alpine pines giving way to more varied vegetation as they descended in elevation. "We're getting close to reservation land," Wolf explained as they rested beneath a towering cottonwood. "My people have protected these lower valleys for generations." "Your people," Maya echoed, suddenly aware of how little she knew about the community they were approaching. "Will they welcome a stranger?" Wolf's expression softened. "The Apache understand displacement and captivity better than most. Our history is written in forced relocations and broken promises." He touched her shoulder lightly. "You will find no judgment there, only respect for your survival." Something in his words loosened a knot that had been tightening in Maya's chest since they began their journey. The fear of re-entering a world that had continued without her, of facing people who could never truly understand what she had endured. They continued in companionable silence, the sun beginning its westward descent. The pain in Maya's ankle had become a constant throb, but she pushed forward, focusing on each step rather than the distance remaining. Wolf remained attentive, his quiet strength a counterbalance to her faltering endurance. As dusk approached, they crested a small rise, and Wolf stopped, a smile breaking across his weathered features. Below them, nestled in a broad valley cut by the silver thread of a river, lay a community of homes. Some traditional structures, others modern buildings with solar panels glinting in the setting sun. Black Mountain Settlement, Wolf said, pride evident in his voice. My home. Maya stared at the lights beginning to flicker on in the gathering darkness, a sight so normal, yet so extraordinary after years of electrified fences and guard towers. Smoke rose from several chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking fires. In the center of the settlement stood a larger building, its purpose unclear from this distance but clearly important given its prominent position. The council hall, Wolf explained, following her gaze, where the elders meet and where important ceremonies are held. The mention of community leaders triggered a sudden anxiety in Maya. Will I have to tell them everything? About the camp, about what happened there? Wolf turned to face her fully, his expression serious. You will tell only what you choose to tell, when you are ready to tell it. My people understand that some wounds need privacy to heal. Relief washed through her, followed by a wave of exhaustion so profound that Maya swayed on her feet. Wolf steadied her with a hand on her elbow. We're almost there, he encouraged. Just a little farther. As they began their descent toward the settlement, a figure appeared on the path ahead, an elderly man with long silver hair, walking with the aid of a carved staff. Despite his obvious age, he moved with remarkable grace, his back straight and his gaze sharp as he spotted them. Wolf straightened, respect evident in his posture. My grandfather, he said quietly to Maya, Joseph Blackwater, the tribe's spiritual leader. The old man raised his hand in greeting, then spoke in a language Maya didn't understand. Apache, she assumed. Wolf responded in the same tongue, his voice carrying both respect and urgency. Joseph's weathered face remained impassive as Wolf spoke, but his eyes, remarkably similar to his grandson's, shifted to Maya with an intensity that seemed to look through her rather than at her. When Wolf finished speaking, the elder approached slowly. My grandson says, you have walked through darkness for many years, Joseph said in perfect unaccented English, that your spirit remained unbroken when your body was imprisoned. Maya found herself unable to respond, overwhelmed by the simple dignity of this man and the profound truth of his words. Joseph nodded as if her silence was answer enough. We have prepared a place for you. And tomorrow, if you are willing, we will hold a ceremony to call back the pieces of yourself that were scattered during your captivity. Maya glanced at Wolf, who nodded encouragement. I would be honored, she finally managed, her voice hoarse with emotion. Joseph smiled, the expression transforming his severe features. Good. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow you begin to heal. He turned to lead them toward the settlement, adding over his shoulder, and perhaps, if the spirits are willing, my grandson will finally stop wandering between two worlds. As they followed Joseph down the path, the lights of the settlement growing closer with each step, Maya felt a strange sensation unfurling within her. Not quite happiness, which seemed too simple a word for the complexity of her emotions, but something equally powerful. It was, she realized, the feeling of coming home, though not to a place she had known before. Rather, it was a return to the possibility of belonging somewhere, of being seen for who she truly was. Scars, strength, and all. Dawn broke over Black Mountain Settlement with gentle persistence, painting the eastern sky in watercolor strokes of amber and rose. Maya woke in the small guest dwelling where she had spent the night, momentarily disoriented by the softness beneath her, a real bed, with clean blankets that smelled of cedar and sage, so different from the thin, musty mattress that had been her only comfort for 7 years. Her ankle had been properly treated by the settlement's healer, an elderly woman named Sarah who had spoken little but worked with practiced hands, applying poultices of herbs that numbed the pain and reduced the swelling. Now, as Maya cautiously tested her weight on the injured limb, she found it much improved, though still tender. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of a young woman carrying fresh clothing and a tray of food, simple fare of corn cakes, berries, and herbal tea. But to Maya, it seemed a feast fit for royalty. "The elders will gather at midday," the woman explained softly. "Wolf asked me to help you prepare for the ceremony, if you wish." Maya nodded, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance after days in the wilderness. The young woman, who introduced herself as Lily, Wolf's cousin, helped her bathe using water warmed over the dwelling's small stove. As Maya washed away the grime of their journey, she was struck by the sight of her own body, the map of scars and hardened calluses that told the story of her captivity more eloquently than words ever could. Lily provided clothing in the Apache tradition, a simple dress of soft deerskin, decorated with subtle beadwork along the hem and sleeves. As she helped Maya dress, Lily spoke of the ceremony to come. "The calling back of the spirit is sacred," she explained, her voice respectful but warm. "It acknowledges that trauma fragments us, that pieces of ourselves become lost in the darkness of our worst experiences." She fastened a belt of woven fibers around Maya's waist. "The ceremony creates a path for those scattered pieces to find their way home." Maya listened silently, both drawn to and intimidated by the ritual that awaited her. Part of her feared that nothing, no ceremony, no matter how sacred, could truly heal the wounds carved into her soul during those 7 years. But another part, a spark that had refused to die even in her darkest moments, yearned for what was being offered, not erasure of her suffering, but integration, wholeness. Outside, the settlement hummed with quiet activity. Children played between the dwellings, their laughter rising like birdsong. Elders sat in patches of sunlight, their weathered hands working at various crafts. It was a community alive with purpose and connection, so unlike the forced labor and isolation of the mining camp. Wolf found her sitting outside her dwelling, soaking in the morning sun. He approached with a quiet deference that acknowledged the weight of the day ahead. "You look rested," he observed, taking a seat beside her on the wooden bench. Maya nodded. "Your people have been kind. They respect what you've endured." Wolf's gaze moved across the settlement. "And they understand the importance of today's ceremony." He hesitated, then added, "There's news. I contacted federal authorities through secure channels last night. They're preparing a raid on the mining camp." Maya's heart stuttered. "When?" "Tomorrow at dawn. They're coordinating with tribal police and state authorities." Wolf's expression was solemn but satisfied. "They'll free everyone, Maya. Elena, Miguel, Jackson, all of them." Tears sprang to her eyes unbidden. The thought that her fellow captives might soon taste the same freedom she now experienced overwhelmed her. She had feared they would pay the price for her escape. "Will they shut down the operation permanently?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "Yes, the evidence we've provided, combined with your testimony, is more than enough to ensure that." Wolf hesitated. "They also want to know if you're ready to contact your family." The question struck Maya like a physical blow. Her parents, the thought of them had been both comfort and torment during her captivity. What would they think of her now? Would they recognize the woman she had become? "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know how to be someone's daughter anymore." Wolf nodded, understanding in his eyes. "There's no rush. When you're ready." At midday, the community gathered at the ceremonial grounds, a circular clearing bordered by ancient cottonwoods whose leaves whispered in the gentle breeze. In the center burned a sacred fire tended by Joseph Blackwater, Wolf's grandfather. The old man wore ceremonial dress, his silver hair bound with a headband of intricate design, eagle feathers rising from it like silent prayers. Maya was led to the circle by Lily and Sarah, the healer. The entire settlement had gathered, standing in respectful silence as she approached. Wolf waited near his grandfather, his presence a familiar anchor in this unfamiliar ritual. Joseph gestured for Maya to sit on a woven mat placed opposite him across the fire. As she settled herself, mindful of her injured ankle, the elder began to speak in Apache, his voice carrying the weight of generations. Wolf translated softly for Maya. "My grandfather says that all suffering has purpose, though we may not understand it while we endure. Your captivity was a darkness not of your making, but your survival was a light of your own creation." Joseph continued, now speaking directly to Maya in English. "Today we acknowledge both the darkness and the light. We create space for your scattered spirit to reunite, for your story to become whole again." What followed was unlike anything Maya had experienced, a ceremony both ancient and immediate that seemed to exist outside of time itself. Joseph guided her through a series of rituals, the burning of sacred herbs, whose smoke he wafted over her with an eagle feather, the sharing of water from a clay vessel that had been used in tribal ceremonies for generations, the recitation of prayers in Apache that, though she couldn't understand the words, resonated in her chest like the echo of her own heartbeat. Throughout, the community maintained a circle of presence around her, not as spectators but as witnesses, their collective energy creating a container strong enough to hold even the most painful fragments of her experience. When Joseph asked if she would speak her story aloud, Maya surprised herself by nodding. And so, for the first time, she gave voice to the full narrative of her captivity, the deception that had lured her to the mining camp, the years of forced labor, the friends she had made and lost, the daily struggles to maintain her humanity in a place designed to strip it away. She spoke for nearly an hour, her voice sometimes faltering but never breaking. As she shared the darkest moments of her captivity, she felt something shifting within her. Not erasure, but transformation. The power those memories held over her seemed to diminish with each word spoken and received by the compassionate circle around her. When she finally fell silent, Joseph rose and approached her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Your spirit has returned," he said simply. "Now you must give it a new name." Wolf stepped forward, explaining softly, "In our tradition, one who has endured great hardship and emerged stronger may take a name that honors that journey." Maya considered this, feeling the profound significance of the moment. After several heartbeats of silence, she spoke. "During my captivity, the mountains were both my prison and my witness. They saw my suffering, but they also showed me the path to freedom." She looked up at Joseph. "If it's acceptable, I would like to be called Mountain's Daughter." Joseph smiled, the expression transforming his austere features. "It is a good name, a strong name." He turned to address the gathering, speaking in Apache and then in English. "Today we welcome Mountain's Daughter to our circle. Her story becomes part of our story. Her strength becomes part of our strength." The ceremony concluded with a community feast that lasted well into the evening. Maya found herself surrounded not by pity, but by genuine acceptance. Children approached her without fear, elders shared stories, young people asked questions about the world beyond the reservation, all treating her not as a victim, but as a valued member of their community. As night fell and stars emerged above the settlement, Maya found a moment of solitude on a small rise overlooking the valley. Wolf joined her there, respectful of her silence but offering his companionship. "How do you feel?" he asked after several minutes had passed. Maya considered the question carefully. "Different," she finally said. "Not healed. I don't think that's possible. Not completely. But reclaimed." She turned to look at him, her expression earnest. "Your grandfather's ceremony gave me something I thought was lost forever, a sense of belonging, not just to a place or a people, but to myself." Wolf nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's the true purpose of the ritual. Not to erase what happened, but to give it meaning within the larger story of your life." They sat in comfortable silence until Wolf spoke again. "The tribal council has offered you sanctuary here for as long as you need. When you're ready to reconnect with your family or re-enter the wider world, we'll help with that too." He paused. "And I'll be here if you want me to be." The simple sincerity of his offer touched Maya deeply. In Wolf, she had found not just a rescuer or protector, but someone who saw her completely. Her trauma, yes, but also her strength, her resilience, her humanity. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I have so much to relearn about living freely." "We'll learn together," Wolf replied. "I'm still finding my way between two worlds myself." Dawn broke the following morning with news that the federal raid had been successful. All 12 prisoners had been freed, the camp supervisors arrested, the operation shut down permanently. Maya wept when she learned that Elena, who had been at the camp even longer than herself, was already providing authorities with names and locations of other suspected illegal operations run by the same organization. In the days that followed, Maya began the painstaking process of reclaiming her legal identity. Wolf and tribal authorities worked with federal agents to restore her official status, obtain new identification documents, and prepare for the eventual prosecution of those responsible for her captivity. 3 weeks after her arrival at Black Mountain Settlement, Maya felt ready to make the call she had both longed for and dreaded. In the privacy of the Tribal Council office, with Wolf waiting supportively outside, she dialed a number that had been engraved in her memory for 7 years. The voice that answered was older, wearier than she remembered, but unmistakably her mother's. Chen Residence. Maya's throat constricted, tears blurring her vision. "Mom, it's Maya!" The silence that followed seemed eternal, broken only by a sharp intake of breath. "Maya," her mother's voice cracked. "My Maya?" "Yes, Mom, it's me. I'm alive. I'm coming home." The conversation that followed was fragmented by tears and disbelief, questions too numerous to answer in one call, and expressions of love so profound they transcended the inadequacy of words. By its end, arrangements had been made for her parents to travel to Montana, to reunite with the daughter they had never stopped searching for. That evening, Maya stood again on the small rise overlooking the settlement, watching the sun descend behind the mountains that had been both her prison and her path to freedom. Wolf joined her, their shoulders nearly touching as they shared the vista. "Are you nervous about seeing them?" he asked. "Terrified," Maya admitted. "I'm not the daughter they lost. I don't know if I can be what they need me to be." "You don't have to be anything but yourself," Wolf said simply. "Mountain's daughter, the woman who survived, the woman who freed not just herself but others." Maya turned to look at him, studying the profile that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "Will you stand with me when they arrive? I don't think I can face it alone." Wolf reached for her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You're not alone anymore. You never will be again." As darkness settled over Black Mountain Settlement, Maya Chen, now also Mountain's daughter, felt the scattered pieces of herself continuing to find their way home. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be legal battles, difficult reunions, nightmares that might never fully fade. But for the first time in 7 years, she looked toward the future not with dread, but with possibility. The mining camp had taken 7 years of her life. It had not taken her spirit. It had not taken her name. And most importantly, it had not taken her capacity to begin again, to emerge from darkness not unchanged, but undefeated. Above them, the stars of a Montana night blazed with ancient fire, witnesses to her captivity and now to her freedom. Maya breathed deeply of the pine-scented air, her hand still held in Wolf's steady grasp, and allowed herself to feel something that had been forbidden for so long. Hope. Not just for survival, but for life. Not just for escape, but for belonging. Not just for justice, but for peace. Mountain's daughter had come home at last.